Let's create a composition inspired by Piet Mondrian. Step 1 is to find a view that you like in Google Maps. Views in Google Maps often have organic shapes instead of straight vertical and horizontal lines. The task that you have to accomplish is to simplify what you see using just vertical and horizontal lines to create your composition. The next step is choosing which colors which of the elements of your composition will be. For my first color, I'm using blue, and I'm focusing on skinny vertical rectangles. I will be making all of the skinny vertical rectangles in my composition blue. Now, not only do I want to pay attention to creating the same shapes in this same color for a more uniform design, I also want to pay attention to how many skinny blue rectangles I have and where they are placed. That is part of my decision on what color to use, and also if I need to modify my design that I've already created to create a more interesting composition, something that is either balanced or imbalanced. Some compositional tricks to consider include the number of rectangles that you have. Sometimes it is more visually interesting to have an odd number instead of an even number. Another compositional trick to consider is where the rectangles are placed on the paper. Do you want them all bunched together or spread out? You also want to consider the size of the different rectangles. Are they all pretty much the same exact size, or do you have variety of larger and smaller rectangles? Now that I've finished with my 3 vertical blue rectangles, an odd number, I'm moving on to horizontal rectangles using the color red. I'm also looking at the larger horizontal rectangles, so those are going to be red in my composition. Now, as I'm coloring them in, it is okay to move my paper around to make it easier to fill in the shapes. Again, I'm going to end up with an odd number of red rectangles. You'll see that right now there's only 4 red rectangles. Later on in the drawing, I add the 5th one to make it an odd number. Now I'm moving on to the color yellow, and I'm using that for smaller elements in this composition. I'm coloring in again rectangles that I see throughout the space, and I'm placing these around the composition to carry the eye as it's looking at the design. It's okay if 2 of them touch each other because later on you're going to be outlining everything in black, so they will appear separated. Here you see me making a decision to change my original drawing before I add a final red rectangle. Now I have 9 yellow rectangles, again an odd number. I'm moving on to outlining all of my shapes with black, so I need to grab my ruler to make sure that I make straight lines. You could try to do this without a ruler, but it is very difficult to make a perfectly straight line without something to guide you. Now, I've already drawn those lines in pencil before, so I'm pretty much just tracing over them and making sure that any stray marker that has gotten outside of the line gets covered up by the black of the marker. I'm using a chisel tip marker because I want a very thick line, but if you don't have a chisel tip marker, you can use a thinner marker that has a fine tip. To make it easier for me to keep track of which lines I'm drawing and not have to move my paper around as much, I'm making all of the lines that go in the same direction, in this case vertical, all at once and working my way across the paper until I have gotten every single one of the vertical lines drawn, or as many as I can see. Now, I do make a mistake when making some of these lines, and you'll see that, but I do end up correcting it later. Now I'm moving on to the horizontal lines, but I am turning my paper to make it easier for me to draw them. So I'm going to work my way across in the same way that I did previously, but going in the other direction to get all of those lines also drawn onto the paper. And as I'm doing that, I do notice that I missed a spot before, so I just quickly add that one in. And once these are all filled in, I can then go on to adding some more elements to my composition. You will notice that I correct my previous mistake by deciding to make that yellow rectangle into a square and then adding the first of what will be many filled in very skinny black rectangles. Now I'm considering the overall composition and deciding which parts I want to add more of those black rectangles to. I have switched to a different marker because the one I used to go over the lines was starting to run out of ink, but really if you're not running out of ink you could use the same marker for the whole thing. And in this particular part, it doesn't matter if the rectangles are vertical or horizontal. I'm just trying to decide where they would best fit visually, and that is partly a personal opinion. So you may have decided to do yours much differently or not used skinny black rectangles at all. You could have done without them and decided that you wanted a lot more color in your composition. For me, I'm going with some of these rectangles spread throughout the piece, and I think it came out pretty well, but again, you might have your own opinion. I also decided that a few spaces needed to be filled in visually, so those ended up being filled in next to each other, pretty much eliminating the original lines and creating a small black square. Before I decide that my composition is complete, I'm looking it over and making a judgment call on if there's any areas where the lines could be touched up to be a little bit crisper. Maybe when I had traced them with the ruler, the mark had gone a little beyond the point that I had really wanted it to, so I'm thickening up some of those lines just to make it not have any stray marks and refining my composition before I consider it done.